And for over 1,000 years, one city stood as the heart of the Roman world. It had survived sieges, plagues, betrayals, and barbarian armies. 23 times enemies had come for its walls, 23 times they had failed. They called it the city protected by God, the capital that could never fall. But in the spring of 1453, an army gathered outside its gates that would prove every legend wrong. This is the story of the Fall of Constantinople, the siege that ended the Roman Empire, closed the Middle Ages, and changed the world forever. To understand what was lost, you have to understand what Constantinople was. Founded by the Emperor Constantine in the year 330, it became the new capital of the Roman Empire. When the western half of Rome collapsed, the east endured. And we call it the Byzantine Empire today, but they never stopped calling themselves Romans. For 1,000 years after Rome itself had fallen, the Roman Empire lived on. Ruled from this single magnificent city, at its peak, Constantinople was the largest, richest city in the Christian world. Its markets overflowed with silk and spices, its churches glittered with gold, and towering above the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia stood a dome so vast that visitors believed it was held up by the hand of heaven itself. But the city's true protection was its walls, the Theodosian walls, a triple line of fortifications, layered moats, and towers that had guarded the city for 1,000 years. No army in history had ever broken through them by force. And they were, quite simply, the most formidable defenses on earth. But by 1453, the empire they protected was a shadow of what it had been. Centuries of war, plague, and betrayal had stripped Byzantium of its lands. The empire that once stretched across 3 continents had been reduced to little more than the city itself and a few scattered territories. The treasury was empty. The population had collapsed, and surrounding it on every side was a young and hungry power. The Ottoman Empire, for decades, the Ottomans had grown stronger as Byzantium grew weaker. They had conquered the lands around the city until Constantinople stood alone, a Christian island in an Ottoman sea. The city was a prize that had tempted sultans for generations. And in 1451, the throne of that empire passed to a young man obsessed with claiming it. His name was Mehmed II. He was just 19 years old. Many underestimated him. They saw an inexperienced boy. They were wrong. Mehmed was brilliant, ruthless, and consumed by a single ambition to take the city that had defied his ancestors for 1,000 years. And Mehmed understood something they did not. The walls that had never been broken were built for an older age. An age before gunpowder. So Mehmed turned to a weapon the world had never truly seen: a cannon. Not just any cannon, a monster. He hired a master founder named Orban, who promised to build a gun so powerful it could shatter the walls of Babylon itself. And the result was a bombard over 8 meters long, capable of hurling a stone ball weighing half a ton. It took 60 oxen and hundreds of men just to move it. When it fired, the roar could be heard for miles and the ground trembled. The age of impregnable walls was about to end. In April of 1353, the Ottoman army arrived. Estimates vary, but Mehmed commanded a force of perhaps 80,000 men, supported by a massive fleet. Inside the city, the Emperor Constantine XI prepared to defend it with everything he had. But everything he had was almost nothing. Fewer than 10,000 defenders. A handful of foreign allies, a few Italian soldiers led by a brilliant commander named Giovanni Giustiniani. The odds were impossible. The world had abandoned them. And the promised help from the West never truly came, and still they refused to surrender. The siege began day after day. Mehmed's great cannon pounded the ancient walls. Section by section, stone by stone, the defenses that had stood for 1,000 years began to crumble. But each night, the defenders rushed to repair the damage, working by torchlight, rebuilding what the cannon destroyed by day. For weeks, the city held. Then Mehmed turned to the water. Constantinople was protected on one side by a harbor called the Golden Horn, sealed off by an enormous chain stretched across its mouth. No ship could enter. So Mehmed did the unthinkable. In a single night, he had his men drag dozens of warships overland, across hills, over greased wooden rails, and lower them into the harbor behind the chain. The defenders woke to find an Ottoman fleet where no fleet should have been. Now the city was surrounded on every side. The defenders were stretched impossibly thin, exhausted, outnumbered, running out of men, gunpowder, and hope. And Mehmed prepared for the final blow. On the night of May the 29th, 1453, the Ottomans launched their great assault. Wave after wave crashed against the walls. First came the irregulars, sent to exhaust the defenders, then the seasoned troops. And finally, the elite of the Ottoman army, the Janissaries. The fighting was ferocious for hours, the impossible held. And the defenders threw back attack after attack, and then 2 things happened that broke the city. Giustiniani, the great Italian commander holding the most critical section of the wall, was gravely wounded and carried from the field. His men, seeing their leader fall, began to waver. And nearby, a small gate called the Kerkoporta had been left unlocked. A group of Ottoman soldiers found it. They poured inside, climbed the tower, and raised their banner above the walls. The cry went up that the city had fallen. Panic spread through the defenders, and the line collapsed. The Ottomans flooded in as his city fell around him. The Emperor Constantine XI, the last Roman emperor, refused to flee. According to legend, he tore off his imperial insignia so he would die as a common soldier, drew his sword, and charged into the oncoming enemy. He was never seen again, his body was never identified. And with him, an empire that had endured for nearly 1500 years came to an end. By morning, the fighting was over. Mehmed II rode through the gates of the city his ancestors had dreamed of for 1,000 years. He made his way to the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia and ordered that it be preserved, transformed into a mosque but standing still to this very day. He was 21 years old, and from that day forward, history would no longer call him Mehmed. It would call him Mehmed the Conqueror. Constantinople became the new capital of the Ottoman Empire, a position it would hold for centuries, the city we now know as Istanbul. The fall of Constantinople sent a shockwave across the world. Scholars fled west, carrying ancient knowledge that would help ignite the Renaissance. The old trade routes to the east were cut, driving Europe's kingdoms to seek new paths across the open ocean, and, within decades, to the discovery of a new world. One empire ended that day, and the modern age began, the Roman Empire, which had risen from a small city by the Tiber and ruled the world for over 1,000 years, finally breathed its last behind the broken walls of Constantinople. And it proved a lesson that every empire eventually learns. No wall is high enough. No city is eternal. And no power, however ancient, lasts forever.